Hi, I'm Rigger, this is Your Right, and today we're having a serious discussion. So as much as this isn't a negative video in any way, this is a discussion video about the future of the show that we all enjoy. I need to actually start this out with the briefest of little warnings here. So, warning. If you are here to debate the relationship of Blake and Yang because you think it's poorly written or invalid or you hate it with a passion, that you think they aren't good together or whatever else, leave. You aren't needed for this discussion. We're here to talk, not to fight. So I will just moderate you out. If any of this happens, I'm just going to moderate it out. But the same goes for if this relationship is your entire existence and you're incapable of civil discussion about it because you're far too passionate about it and you can't question it and its future. So if this is untouchable and perfect, you also should probably leave because, again, we're not trying to hurt anyone's feelings, but we are trying to have an honest discussion here, which might mean discussing some meaner options and things you might not want to hear. Just basically, no fighting, let's all respect each other, and if there is any, I'm just going to delete them and ban you out of the channel, because I can't be bothered to deal with it. But moving on swiftly from that down note, because this isn't a down video, that's the start and end of it, warning done. Now onto the actual topic. This latest episode saw the kiss happen. People treat this kiss like it makes things canon, which I find kind of weird. It's been canon for ages with obvious flirtation. Clearly there's something there, but this is a huge leap forward. This is a serious landmark. It's official now, quote unquote. And that will very much change things. So what I wanted to really do was cover this entire topic for us as an audience and have us ask ourselves perhaps some difficult questions about what happens next. Because right now, everyone is wrapped up in the kiss. Everyone is in love with this or dealing with this, whatever. And we're not really thinking about the future, but I thought, let's ask those questions. We are in fact moving past the kiss here. We're not talking about the relationship or anything in the past. We are looking only to the future from this point. Now, after a lot of thinking about the best way to cover this, I decided that breaking it down into 3 distinct points about things we need to ask ourselves is probably the best way to do it, because each of us are going to have different answers to these points, and there isn't a correct one. That's kind of the point of the discussion. It's not let's find the right answer, let's hear what everyone has to say because there is no right answer. It's all personal opinion. However, that's what makes the discussion valid, so let's go over it. Here are the points. It's 1 concern and 2 questions. 1 concern, then 2 questions about the future, and they go in ascending order of how severe they are and what we need to talk about. It gets more complicated as we go. So they are as follows. 1. Concern. Blake and Yang as individual characters. 2. Question. What do we want for the relationship's portrayal moving forward? And 3. Question. What does this mean for the ultimate fate of the characters? So, let's break it down. 1. Blake and Yang as individual characters. This is mostly here because I noticed, as some others did, that in the past, when Blake and Yang have grown much closer, that their roles as individuals greatly diminish. Case in point is Volume 7. Obviously, they just overcame a huge demon from their past and became much closer as a result, and after arriving in Atlas, they basically were the same character for a lot of that volume. They were always together even when split up from everyone else, and they never really did much to set themselves aside as individuals from the other characters, mostly just acting together. And the only time that they did have any conflict or discussion was acting with each other, alone even. So, their individual characters almost all but vanished from the impact on the story. It's not that they together didn't do anything, because they obviously did, it's that their individuality as different characters started to feel much more minimal. So, basically at the time, they became almost one character. But that was fine. The obvious rebuttal is, at the time, there was so much more to do. They had their big moment in Volume 6, and by the time we got to Atlas, there were so many more things going on. We had them go through a lot, we developed them closer, now we can put them somewhat on the back burner of our minds, not doing too much and check in occasionally for a few moments with them, without any further real development. And at the time, that was okay. And this was remedied in Volume 8 again, because again, they had conflict to force them apart, and they started having individual actions again. Now, while this all makes sense, it brings up the same issue here because the same thing has just happened, but we're in a much more important time of the story. Now that they've developed further, they've kissed, it's sealed, it's serious, this is gonna happen, we need to look at this question again, because the one big advantage of the Ever After that we've seen is how isolated it is with these characters, and how they can have some real time for character development here away from everything. The creators themselves have discussed in their behind the scenes videos how much nicer it is writing this volume because they don't have all the characters outside and all the plot going on, except that is a daunting task because it's coming up again. We will not be here forever. We are returning to the chaos with every character we've ever seen possibly who's still alive, the end of the world and everything going on. Much more threatening big plot points than this relationship. So, when that happens, will we once again turn Blake and Yang into one character for the ease of it? Will they be written off as basically finished for development? They're together, they're done, that's that over with, and just stick them sort of at the back until we ride out the rest of this plot, till probably right towards the conclusion, where likely towards the end of everything, they will become more prominent again, because we will get down to the point of focusing on Team RWBY versus the bad guys, like the ultimate conflict, Team RWBY facing down Salem, that kind of thing, where their individualness will come out again because we'll have big character moments with them. So, we need to ask ourselves if we're okay with that. Is that something worth being concerned about? That they might basically, now they've given you the kiss, cap Blake and Yang here, and just say they're done, put them in the background, work on everything else, and the big overarching plot, and just let them sit there, not really being their own characters until they're needed right at the end, probably for when we do the big showdown with the big bad end of the whole series type thing. Are you okay with that? Because there's evidence of something similar happening before, and it could happen here again. That leads us into question 2. So, 2. What do we want for the relationship portrayal moving forward? This question's not just the balance of the show between personal emotional struggles and the wider far-reaching plot, but also simply, what do you want to see then? For the rest of this volume, surely people will still be freaking out about the kiss, and that's fine, but what happens next? If Blake and Yang aren't capped off here, if we don't do what I just said, and we don't just call them finished, how do you want to see their relationship grow further, considering they'll also be facing all the things we talked about, the end of the world, and possibly seeing people and their friends dying, all the big bad stuff? Should they just have a quick kiss in the background of scenes, or whenever they've been apart for a little bit, and should they just stand next to each other with an arm around each other, and that's it? Leave it at that? Just lip service, basically, to remind us that this is happening? Or do you want to see more relationship, including struggle, ups and downs? It's such a strong thing to consider. It took 10 years of our real lives to get to this kiss, and people are, for the most part, insanely happy about it finally happening. So do you want to see further issues and arguments and ups and downs for this relationship moving forward? Or do you just want to keep them as they are? Do you just want them to be happy like this and not put those elements in? Do you want to also, that questions, keep them as a pair, or have them be individuals with perhaps differing views on things that might seriously come up? Do we do the frankly anime thing of the kiss, meaning it's finished, it's done, and then it's just fairy tale from here? Or is the trials and tribulations of facing these horrible scenarios and turning things from just interpersonal drama to relationship drama when they have disagreements or issues to face, and the idea of each other getting hurt, things like that, growing the relationship further, is that more important for you to see? Is that what you want? Remembering that that comes at the expense of this idyllic, happy build-up of 10 years to this moment, because it doesn't last. There's so many ways to approach this. Perhaps seeing a real relationship grow on screen is really interesting to you because you don't get that a lot in these type of shows. Or perhaps you see it as putting their relationship in the background and keeping them happy but not really delving into it. Is that insulting because we waited 10 years for this relationship and now we're not going into it? Does that rob you of some of what you were hoping for? Also, do we have time? We've got Salem to worry about and the end of the world and all that. You know, it keeps coming back to that. This is what I mean when I say there isn't a correct answer. It will depend on you individually. That's excluding the people whose opinion is that they dislike the relationship, or they're just completely uninvested and don't really mind either way. They're just not invested in it, but they still like the show. They're all audiences that the show still has to serve, people that are watching, so it can't just become the Blake and Yang show either. We have to remember everything else. But really, all these little questions build up to the last big question, the hardest one by far. What do you want for the fate of these characters? This is where my request to keep things civil might get tested, because it's a very serious and very interesting question to face, to actually objectively look at what we have in front of us and what's possible. Let's lay it out there. What's your personal opinion on threats to the relationship, and more importantly, the possible demise of those involved? On the lighter side, obviously, this is actually the lighter side, what if they broke up? What if ultimately we went on a big journey that it didn't work out in the end? Even after Salem, they beat the big bad and realized that though they love each other, they had goals apart and they go their separate ways, but have learned from all this experience. Is that a waste of time for you? Despite all the changes the characters went through to get here, they didn't get to be together in the end because they learned that it wasn't right for them. Is that too much? Is that a waste? Perhaps you are enraged by that, feeling like you were baited with this relationship that didn't happen. I will admit that's not very likely, but it's just worth throwing in here with these questions, because it is the lighter side of this much darker question, which is much more likely than them just breaking up, which is the question of the fate of these characters. How do you feel if someone dies? What if Blake or Yang die? What if one of them doesn't make it? There are massive upsides and downsides to that happening. In one camp, the obvious, how dare you? How dare you build this up for 10 years and work on it all the way to this amazing moment just to tear it away from us? You have used us, you've manipulated your audience, and I hate you. Or the flip side, how amazing. You have people so invested, 10 years of build to a genuine deep relationship which is pulling real feelings out of a huge amount of your community, meaning a massive part of your audience is hugely invested in the result of this. People really, really care, and meaning that the heartbreak that happens, the emotional impact of it being taken away, is so real. It's the most effect you could ever have, perhaps, on your audience in this whole narrative. One of the hardest things to do in a story is get people to truly care, and this is something people truly care about it. And that means that the impact of it being taken away will be massive. They will hate the villain that did it. They will cry for the characters they love. They can't imagine what the future will be. They'll be invested in the resolution because are you going to bring them back? What's going to happen? How will this impact everyone left behind? The questions swirl. It will keep people seriously invested because you wouldn't at this point be trying to hook people for another season. If this happened, it's likely going to happen right at the last few episodes of the entire show. So they're not going to mind as much if you absolutely hate them and quit, because they're not really losing any viewers for a show that's ending. But let's be real, you're also not going to quit 2 episodes before the end. You are going to keep watching, and you are going to really care about what happens, because the questions play on your mind before the ultimate conclusion. And that's where the argument is. And obviously, there's a lot more weight on this because of the LGBT aspect. Do you argue that it's manipulation perhaps of representation specifically? That you've manipulated specifically the LGBTQ side of your audience by creating this long-term, deep relationship, and rather than allowing it to happen and have a good conclusion, you are instead ripping it away from them just to perhaps keep them watching up to that point. Are you going to call it the bury your gays trope? Which is exactly what happened with Clover. Lots of people ran to that, although Clover fit that trope much more closely because he was only around for a volume rather than these characters who have such great importance. So it wouldn't necessarily fit that trope exactly, but you can understand why people would run to that as something to hurl at the creators. Or do you see it from the flip side? Rather than focusing in on the representation aspect, do you see the emotional manipulation as good? It's what a show is meant to do. It's meant to take you on this big emotional ride, get you invested, and that includes hurting you at the right points. It's pretty common for a death in a straight relationship to be used between characters for a weighty emotional moment and a melancholy ending. So, should perhaps this relationship be treated differently because it's representation? Or is it better if it's treated the same and they are able to die because it's not special, it's normalized? There is so many ways to take this. And I'm not necessarily endorsing any one of them. I want to make that clear. It's just worth asking the questions. I don't have the answer. And I'm not sure there is a right answer to ever find. Like I said, it's going to matter to each person differently on what angle they view this from. I mean, let's argue for the death side for a second. Let's have a look at it. It would fit the themes of the show. It was even Blake's line, that life is not a fairy tale. Perhaps we prove that by not giving them a fairy tale ending that's so clean cut that you would expect. Though, then again, RWBY counters with, that's why we're here, to make it better. So, is that in fact what we should go for? That these 4 specifically are here to make it better and give you the fairy tale ending that the rest of the show deprived you of? But then, it's also a very normal ending. All the heroes survive and win. Congratulations. Only you can answer that question yourselves. And that leaves out the pretty common trope outside of Blake and Yang, like of course RWBY doing a self-sacrifice, in which case you would want Blake and Yang and Weiss around to witness it and see her do it and object and be involved as the rest of the team. Sure, you could do it that way. But pulling it back to our focus of Blake and Yang, there's so many ways to do this and discuss this. I can only raise the questions. Usually the idea of main characters permanently dying in anime isn't really something to worry about until the very end. And also, this isn't a show that's pulled its punches, so perhaps it could stick to its guns and kill some characters, and also not just the main character sacrifice, which almost seems pretty in line with how some stories go, but instead a shocking death of a secondary main character who you definitely didn't expect and who you all thought was safe and all loved. Which pulls us around to even bigger arguments of, are happy endings cliche, or do we just want a happy ending so this story wraps up nicely? There's so much to talk about. We're talking about, entertainment theory that's gone back hundreds of years with all these questions. We start getting into more tropes. What if they did both? What if they killed one of them, but then brought them back at the end? Would that be against how you want to see this story? Would that be too easy? Would that be a get-out-of-jail-free card that doesn't fit the tone, or would you be okay with it because it took you on the emotional ride but made everything better at the end? Or, what if both died? Is there a chance that all of Team RWBY die? Would that be better? Because they don't get fairy tale lives, but they do save the world and achieve their goal for the betterment of everyone, and they'll be together in the afterlife. That trope, is that what you'd like? Would that be satisfying? And the answer's going to change from person to person. And then, how would you do that? Would you have them both die in one big attack, or all of them? Or would you do one at a time, where they start dying one at a time, but by the time you get to the second or third one, you realize what's going to happen is they're all going to die, and you sort of know it's coming, like when they were falling. Is that not a good ending either? It's really up to you. Is it too dark for your tastes? Is it too happy for your tastes? Everyone's answer will change. So all I've done this video is really ask you questions for yourselves. Like I said, I can't answer them. What I will do is at the end here, to make it a bit personal, to talk about my input on some of this, just so it's a video from my channel, not just a random video to make you think, I will put in something that came to mind. At the end here, I'll give you an idea. Because if you want my honest opinion on it, from looking at it just from storytelling stuff, when I've thought about the end of the show, obviously there's a million ways you could do it. I've thought over and over, like everyone else, how is this show going to end? And whilst trying to take away the politics from it, just looking at it as a story, not trying to say anything specifically, the death of Yang has come up to me over and over again specifically. To me, it feels so powerful. If I was to pick someone, it's Yang. She has this close relationship with Blake, and she is family to RWBY, making her extremely tight with 2 members of the 4, so that's the most of anyone in that team. Although we all know they love each other, but you have those really tight relationships to 2 of the 4. She's also physically the strongest and the tank of the team, so losing her shows just how little chance you have of success in a battle. If she goes down, the rest of you can't win this fight with strength, and that's kind of been a theme in the show, is no victory in strength, right? She's also impulsive, and throwing herself in front of an attack for RWBY or Blake, or even Weiss, is completely in character of what she would do. It's not something she's learned to put aside. She's a caring person, and she's a fighter. She does this over and over again. It reinforces her heroics and selfless acts of love and passion. But perhaps, most importantly, it gives us one giant opportunity that I'd really like to talk to you all about. Because talking about the end of this show, a lot of people have this idea that they're going to finally beat Salem and maybe the relics won't come together or whatever. There's lots of ideas, but let's look at it this way. If the relics did come together and the gods returned, and whatever happens, happens, and they're summoned, this is a perfect test of the team. It's exactly the same as Salem. A horrible, heartbreaking, unfair death that anyone would want reversed, and it's only fair to ask for it. And that these representatives of humanity, they have to do what Salem was unwilling to do, to accept life and death and not ask the gods to revive Yang, to realize that option is in front of them, to try, even though they know they won't succeed, to ask them and demand it of them, knowing they can do it and not do it. Will they succeed where Salem failed? Despite how justified it is to feel the loss, the answer is right in front of you in the gods. They can do it and not ask because you know you shouldn't, and have to deal with that pain that Salem was unwilling to face. Now, there's other versions of this. Maybe you say it should be Oscar, because then he's in the position of Oz, because he's the new Oz. But no matter how much some people may really want RWBY and Oscar to get together, even if that did happen now, it would never compare to the depth of these relationships that have been going since the beginning of the whole series. It doesn't have the same gravity and investment, no matter how much you may like it. You could also say perhaps do it with RWBY, that RWBY dies and the rest of the team have to concede and let her do that and let her be dead and not ask for her back because she's the protagonist. But that does things like leave Blake and Yang as a couple, something for them to fall back on. And the whole point of that kind of choice is to make it as painful as possible, to emphasize how impossible it is to not ask for it, to not fight for it. It tears up more relationships, and it means that RWBY, the protagonist, is actually involved in the decision. As leader, she will be forced to look at her dead sister and her dead sister's partner and say, we're not going to ask for her back. We will let her rest and do what Salem could not. And I think that's incredibly powerful. As for a display that humanity can come together and not ask of the gods what they shouldn't, they might really work as an option. Something huge. And also, that means that the death wasn't for nothing. It wasn't just to hurt you. It's to emphasize the whole point of the story and to give these characters the chance to make this incredible, hard, unfair decision for the sake of the world. But, again, does that anger you? Is that unacceptable? Because in the world afterwards, Blake and Yang never get to be together, and RWBY loses her sister and never gets her back until all of them reach the afterlife themselves, whatever time that happens. Or do the gods accept this, and then as a gift to them for realizing their mistake, undo it anyway? Or would that go against the point? So probably not. Again, only you know the answer to that question for yourself. This video was just a whole lot of questions. Questions about the show, but more so questions about ourselves. It's true that we all have different values, and that will change our answer, but we've all been brought together with this show, and there will be an answer one day, a canon answer to what happens. So, if we can be civil and respect each other's opinions without being too combative or provocational, please let me know your own feelings, your answers to some of these questions, your own ideas of what might happen instead. What would anger you? What would you be happy with? What do you actually think might happen, and what do you want to happen? Because those comments will be fascinating to read, and I encourage everyone else, if you are curious, to go and read some of those comments. See what everyone has to say. But for now, don't be too drab. Cheer up. Nothing bad's actually happened yet. There's more of Volume 9 to go, and more RWBY in general. And until next time, my name is Rigger. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I hope I did alright.